Hello everyone and welcome to Lesson 1 of Unit 1 of IB History 1, which is our Historical Foundations unit. And just to make sure everybody is refreshed on what the numbers are here, this first number here is Unit 1 and this is Lesson 1. So 1.1 is Unit 1, Lesson 1. So that's what we're starting today. And our lesson title is here, Introduction to Historical Thinking, and here are our lesson objectives. By the end of the lesson today, you should be able to understand historical context and can provide historical context to items of history that you already know. You should also be able to understand cause and effect along with continuity and change as a historical process. And you will also become familiarized with more of these IB command terms: analyze, compare and contrast, discuss, evaluate and assess, examine, and to what extent. So throughout the school year, you will be exposed to more and more types of historical thinking skills. But right here on the onstart of 11th grade history, we start off with a few fundamental basic ones. And the first one is historical context. So what is historical context? A historical context refers to the moods, attitudes, and conditions that existed in a certain time. Context is the setting for an event that occurs. So when we're talking about give me more historical context, we're asking that you set the scene for us. So tell us who is there, what's going on, what are they wearing, what are they talking about, is it cold outside, are they in Europe, are they in Asia? You're setting the scene for us, what's caused them to be there. So historical context is all of that background story that really gives us a more fuller and richer picture of what event we're talking about. So in the example that you see here in the purple squares, in this purple square here, is a historical context about an event in Texan history or history of Texas. So something where none of us are very familiar with. But long story short, the event here that we're referring to is this event here, is the breaking of the treaty with the Cherokee Nation. Because if you look over here, Sam Houston wrote a treaty with the Cherokee Nation. And somehow or another, between this treaty with the Cherokee getting created and Texas becoming independent, we have all of this strife, or something happened that caused this event to happen. How did, one of the founding fathers of the Republic of Texas, Sam Houston, who is pro-Native American, and then all of a sudden, when Texas becomes independent, they break the treaty? Well, there's historical context. So the story in between here, something had to happen. And so what happens here is the Senate delays it, then the Senate rejects it, and then Mexico gains the support of the Cherokee, and Cherokee actually fight with Mexico. And then this is one of the reasons that caused Texas to pull out of this treaty they signed with the Cherokee. So this is giving you what historical context is. It's telling you the setting and the scene and the backstory about why an event happened. The next historical thinking skill we're going to focus on is cause and effect. And cause and effect can be defined right here on the right, is how one event or choice leads to the occurrence of another event or choice. So how one event caused or impacted another event. And so to illustrate cause and effect, we're going to take a look at this little paragraph here about the sinking of the Titanic. And so I will read this aloud to you and follow along with me. The Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912, with more than 2,000 people on board. The Titanic itself was known as the unsinkable ship and was designed with over 30 lifeboats in case of an emergency. Yet prior to setting off to sea, 12 were removed because some thought the deck would be too cluttered. On the night of April 14th, the Titanic collided with an iceberg, leaving a hole in the ship. Water soon poured into the ship, and lifeboats were loaded first with women and children and then with men. These lifeboats were needed for passengers to stay out of the cold water. It soon became obvious that not everyone would be able to find safety and a lifeboat. The remaining passengers were issued life jackets, but over 1,500 people lost their lives as the Titanic sank to the bottom of the freezing waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Only around 700 people survived the tragic story of the Titanic. So one of the first cause and effect events that we can see in the paragraph is right here in the very beginning. So we see in the beginning here, some people thought that the deck would be too cluttered with light boats because they just weren't that attractive, so they removed them. So that is the effect. People thought that it looked ugly and they would be too cluttered, so they removed them. One event caused the other. Here's another example in green. There was not enough room on the lifeboats. So passengers were issued life jackets for safety. So since there was not enough room in the lifeboats for all the passengers, they had to issue life jackets to the others. And yet again, here's one other example. There were not enough lifeboats, and so sadly, more than 1,500 people lost their lives as a result of this. So in this one little paragraph, you can see multiple different types of examples of something that of one event can cause or create an effect later on down the road. Our last historical thinking skill for this lesson is continuity and change. Now, this is one that many of you are probably very familiar with, but here's a very simple one. If you take a look at this picture here, or these two pictures here, these two pictures are of the exact same place. And this is Shanghai, China. It's one of the largest cities in the world. And in fact, when I was in your position in high school, Shanghai, China was the largest and most populated city in the world at that time period. But it shows you when I was in high school right here in 1990, it looks like, this is what I think of when I think of China. When people ask me to think of China, this is what I think of, because this is the image I have of China when I was growing up in your age. However, this bottom picture here is what that same area looks like 11 years ago in 2010. So it's probably even added more skyscrapers and more tall buildings and things like that. So Shanghai has definitely changed over time. And so the way things change and the way things stay the same throughout time, that is what continuity and change over time is. If you will, take a moment to pause and do a skill practice. Pretend that you are a historian writing about the Black Lives Matter movement. What historical context would you provide for the event? What relevant example of cause and effect can you provide for the Black Lives Matter movement? Is there any example you can provide of continuity and any example of change that you can see as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement? Now to the second part of this lesson, we're going to focus on IB command terms. Now there are a lot of IB command terms, but we're going to focus on the most essential for history. And here's the first one, the IB command term of analyze. So what does analyze mean? It means to break down in order to bring out the essential elements or structure. So for an example, the previous photos that we showed you of Shanghai, China, for you to analyze them, you would look at both of those images and look for differences, similarities, to address, for example, this question. How would you analyze those images to support the claim that China is more capitalist than it is communist? Because remember, China is a communist nation, but the images we see of Shanghai in 2010 with all the skyscrapers and the big buildings, and Shanghai looks like New York. New York's in the United States, and the United States is a capitalist country. So explaining the evidence and providing context, looking at those two images, you can clearly analyze them and see that there are differences between them. So analyze means to break down. Our second IB command terms are compare and contrast. You will see this sometimes as well on an IB exam. So compare and contrast means give an account of similarities and differences between two or more items or situations, referring to both or all of them throughout. What this means when we say for both or all of them throughout, you have to refer to both contrasts and compare. You can't just do all comparisons or all contrast. You actually have to have both. Now, this is a very important thing for you to understand where I just put the square. When you write a compare and contrast short answer for an IB exam, put this in your head, drill it in there because you must remember this. You are expected to compare and contrast 6 components, and you must always have a 3-3 or a 4-2 split. What that means is that you must always have 3 comparisons and 3 contrasts, or 4 comparisons and 2 contrasts, or 4 contrasts and 2 comparisons. Okay? So here's an example for you. We compared, there's 2 teachers teaching IB History 1, me and Ms. Brannigan, who was one of our new teachers. So we do a 3-3 split. In terms of race, we are both white. Those are similarities. Place of origin, I'm from Georgia. She is from Michigan. Those are different. We are both teachers. Similarity. I'm in my 40s. She is in her 20s. That is different. We both enjoy baking. That is similar. And I attended Florida State University. She attended the University of Michigan, and those are different. And so you can see this is a 3-3 compare and contrast. The next IB command term is discuss. And believe it or not, this is the one that is probably most difficult for many students to do. And the ironic thing about this is that you do this every day, all day long, and you're doing it and you don't even know that you're doing it. Here's what I mean by this. The definition of discuss means you do this, first of all, as a person, not as a group. So when the IB asks you to discuss something, you're going to write your discussion down from your point of view and only your point of view. So what does it mean to discuss? It means to offer a considered and balanced review that includes a range of arguments and factors or hypotheses. Opinions or conclusions should be presented clearly and supported by appropriate evidence. Putting this in teenagerese, this is just, spilling the tea. Okay? This is spilling all the tea. This is giving me everything. This is discuss. This is what you do at the lunchroom table. Okay? When you are sitting there in the second period and you're so excited and you're like, okay, I can't wait to get down there because I want to tell so-and-so about what so-and-so said and so-and-so did this and she did that and did it and everybody wants to know the drama. This is what discuss is. So here's an example. Discuss the justification for U.S. imperialism. So I just asked you to just give me, just discuss this with me. And so you're like, well, it was part of Manifest Destiny, the idea that we wanted to spread democracy, We were jealous of Europeans because they were scrambling for control of Africa. And it was out of economic necessity because we were producing so much stuff, we needed to dump it somewhere. So, so I'm not really, I'm giving you factual evidence. I'm giving you a clear opinion and several different arguments and hypotheses. So this is what discussion is. So if we ask you to discuss something in an essay, this is what you're doing. You're literally going to throw out as much information about that topic as you possibly can and provide evidence as well. The next IB command term, evaluate or assess, is pretty easy because it means make an appraisal by weighing the strengths and limitations. So if we told you to assess the validity of this statement, the U.S. Civil War was fought over states' rights. So if we say assess the validity of that statement, we are asking, do you think this is valid? And so here's how you would evaluate and assess that. Southern states believe states' rights were greater than national rights. States created the Union, not the other way around. Others feel that the war was fought over racism, states' rights to keep slaves, and others say the war was economic between dominant slave economics in the South with an emerging industry in the North. So this is what you're saying when you're evaluating and assessing. You're just giving an appraisal of the event or of the statement, saying, this statement could be agreed upon by this group, but not that group. So you're evaluating the statement on whether it's valid or not. And our next IB command term is examine. And this one is pretty moderately easy, I would think. So what does it mean to examine? Consider an argument or concept in a way that uncovers the assumptions and interrelations of the issue. Debunk misconceptions, discuss relationships, provide context. So examine it means you're kind of breaking it down and you're going to elaborate. You're kind of breaking something down and then into smaller parts, and then you're going to elaborate on those parts. So for example, if someone said, examine the long-term causes of the First World War. Well, there's 4 real main causes of World War I, and the acronym is MAIN, and you can see it here: militarism, alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. And so if you were examining this, these would be like your body paragraphs, and then you would give certain examples of militarism, certain examples of the alliance system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how you would examine that particular question. And last but certainly not least, and everybody's personal favorite, to what extent is our last IB command term. And this is the one that all of you are most familiar with because you've written one of to what extent paper in almost every class since you've been here. So officially, what does it mean? Well, how much is one opinion better than another opinion and why? That's what to what extent means. Opinions and conclusions should be presented clearly and supported with appropriate evidence and sound argument. You must have a quantifier. And what I mean by this is that you absolutely have to have something that says, This, I agree with this to a greater extent, to a lesser extent, to a moderate extent, or something. If you are addressing a to what extent question, you must have a quantifier. So here's an example. To what extent was U.S. neutrality maintained prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor? So the United States did not enter World War II until the attack on Pearl Harbor. That's a correct statement. However, there's a question about how neutral was the United States, because we did have the Lend-Lease program and the cash and carry policy that we provided weapons and supplies to allied countries like the United Kingdom and France before the United States even entered the war. So the question is, how neutral was the United States? So that would be a to what extent type of question that would be very good to use this skill with. And that concludes our lesson on Introduction to Historical Thinking. So, looking back at the beginning slide about our lesson goals, let's turn them into questions. Do you understand historical context, and can you provide historical context to items of history you already know? Do you understand cause and effect along with continuity and change as historical processes? And do you fully understand the most common IB command terms such as analyze, compare and contrast, discuss, evaluate and assess, examine, and to what extent? If you can answer all three of these questions, clap and pat yourself on the back. You did an amazing job. At this point, you want to make sure that you look to find your 1.1 activity, complete that in your groups, and then move on to lesson 1.2 if you have time. Thanks so much for your time and have a great day.